Arriving in my mission was a really crazy experience. It's a fun story because, I was in Columbus, Ohio, right, where it was in the dead of winter that I received my visa. So the day I left, it was -1, on the thermometer. It was cold. So I left there and then I came down to Brazil where it was 80 degrees and like 90% humidity or something like that. So that temperature change was the first big shock that I felt when I came to Brazil. And then after that, just seeing this new culture, all these different people, all of them communicating in a different language that at that point I really didn't know because I just spent 6 months only speaking English and not focusing on Portuguese whatsoever. So I showed up to our mission. I remember I was with a bunch of other Americans. There's one American that actually visa waited for a longer time than me. He waited for about 9 months in the United States. So he thought he wasn't even going to get his visa. But anyway, we showed up together and we both just looked at each other like, dude, Elder, what have we gotten ourselves into? This is crazy. And then as we came down the escalators and we met our president, the assistants. I remember there was one American assistant, Elder Peterson. He had been down there in Brazil for a while and he was just speaking rapid fire Portuguese, just spoke it really well. And I remember that was my first impression of just being amazed by that. I'm like, he's American? Doesn't even sound like one. And at that moment, it was inspiring because it was like, it's okay, I'm going to learn the language. Here's a fellow American. He's speaking it. He's speaking just as fast as anybody else. So I got this. I can learn this language. But yeah, the culture was very different. Everything was different. That part of Brazil is a little bit more third world. Nothing wrong with that. I loved that. Everything was simple. And there is so much beauty and simplicity that as we were driving to the mission office, we would pass through a lot of kind of the poorer part of town as we were going there. And it was humbling to just come from Ohio. I just served in an area that had, quite a bit of money there outside of Columbus, a suburb that was doing all right. And so that was a big change too, just seeing these differences in the environments and what people are living with. But I really liked it. It was really interesting. I'm from Hawaii, and there are a lot of similarities between that part of Brazil and where I lived in Hawaii. So in a weird sort of way, it was kind of like going home. But those were some of the first impressions I had. And also just how easy it was to talk to people. People talk to each other down in Brazil. I mean, here in America, we're kind of in this smartphone culture where we can't communicate with people very well. Where it's easier for us to text each other. Well, down in Brazil, they don't really do that. I mean, they have text messaging and stuff, but in general, people are just much more connected, and it's so much easier to talk with people, and they converse with you, and they open themselves up and actually will tell you things about their lives. And so I just thought that was really interesting too, how the people in general are just much more receptive. And I saw that the Brazilians are very friendly people, especially in that part of the country. If I hear stories that if you go to southern Brazil, people are a little bit more European, a little bit more American down there, where they're kind of a little bit more standoffish. That's what I hear. I don't really know. But at least in Belem, I know that people are very friendly, and it's very easy to talk to them. And so my first area, I went out about 8 hours by bus. No, it was 15 hours by bus. It took 15 hours on kind of a big Greyhound bus to get to my first area, Cana dos Carajás, and it was beautiful out there. I remember the assistant that I was just mentioned, Elder Peterson, he actually served in that area, and he told me about it when I got called there. He said, Elder Marler, this area, as you go out there, this is going to be like Book of Mormon country. That as you're going out there, it's just going to be rolling plains and forests, green hills, green mountains. Everything's going to be green and alive. And you're going to be on this funny little dirt road. And it was funny because as we were in the bus, there were a lot of points where the road would get kind of steep because you're going along the rims of hills and such. And there were a lot of points where I was like, oh my gosh, this bus is going to flip over and we're going to fall off the road and die. It doesn't work out that way though. Brazilians are pretty boss at driving. They know what they're doing down there. But we showed up to our first area, which is funny. It's this big city in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of nowhere, this city. I was like, why is this even here? And it turns out that it was a gigantic gold mine that was constructed out in the middle of this wilderness. And so the city was built around it. So these were some of the first people that I was meeting. It was this big mining town. And the people are so friendly. It was amazing. Especially, foreigners like me and my trainer. My trainer he's Brazilian, but he was from southern Brazil, so he was basically a celebrity too, because that was really interesting to them to meet a southerner. And then here I am, an American, in the middle of the state of Pará, 15 hours away from the giant metropolis that generally people go to. And so everyone's just curious, like, what is this American doing here in Cana dos Carajás, like in the middle of this funny little city in the middle of nowhere? And people just open themselves up so much to hear our messages. And that was pretty much a general trend. Everywhere I went, people were open to us. They were ready to receive our message. They were at least willing to talk to us. Not everybody is going to receive the message, and any future missionary that's listening to this, don't get me wrong, it's not going to be easy. Not everyone's going to listen to your message, but, everyone's willing to at least chat with you and talk to you, and that can be refreshing too. Belem Mission is a gigantic mission, for starters. And the portion of Brazil that it lies in is up in northern Brazil. So you have a bunch of states along the north of Brazil. And the most northern states would include some of them, the more famous ones, Amazonas, which that's the Manaus mission now. And then there's the state of Pará, that's Belem Mission. Then there's another state called Amapá. And Amapá is actually part of the Belem Mission as well. I'll talk about that a little bit after. But the Belem Mission is actually a really old mission. It's been around for a long time, but it used to be gigantic. The Manaus mission that we know today was once part of the Belem Mission. So basically, the entire top half of Brazil was almost all one mission, and that was the Belem Mission. But ever since, they've been carving it up and forming dozens of missions, and so the Belem Mission's a little bit smaller, but it's still really big, because the state of Pará is huge. And specifically, some cool things about it is that a lot of the Amazon forest runs through there, that the Amazon River cuts right through the state, and so the city of Belem actually sits right on the mouth of the Amazon River as it dumps into the Atlantic Ocean. So Belem itself is cool in where it's situated, but don't get me wrong, it's not just ocean. Outside of Belem, there's actually dozens and dozens and dozens of islands. And apparently, one of the biggest islands in the world is outside of Belem. It's called Marajó, which there are buffalo on this island. So that's really weird. I always wanted to go there, but they haven't opened up an area there yet. But one of the cool things about the church in Belem is that now there's about 9 stakes in one district, something like that. But the phase that the church is in right now in Belem is that it's just growing like crazy. The church is catching like wildfire. There's so much work to be done right now in the Belem Mission. And all over the place. There are areas being opened up all over the state. Just because that's how big it is. About 6 of these stakes that I just mentioned were just in Belem, just in the capital city. And a few of these other stakes lie along different cities that are far away from Belem, from where mission headquarters are. There are 3 distant zones, as we call them in our mission. There's one in Santarém, which you have to take a plane for about 2 hours to get to that area. Another zone is Marabá, which is a city that takes about an hour and a half by plane to get to. It's like commercial airline, right? Not a little doty plane, but. And then the other distant zone is actually in the state of Amapá. As I mentioned, that's the Macapá zone. And that's a really special one. But yeah, there are all these different distant zones, and I spent about half my mission in these distant zones, and so it's really interesting that you're far away from mission headquarters, so there will be long periods of time where you don't get to see your mission president. But it's cool because you get trusted a lot to go out to these different distant areas. So I actually enjoyed my time out in the distant zones the most. But now the church is moving into a phase where they're trying to consolidate in between these bigger cities and Belem. So you want the church to kind of spread out and take hold everywhere. And so right as I was leaving the mission, they were opening up a lot of areas in different cities, within the state. And so you get to go on a lot of good adventures in Belem. Like, I would say that's one of the primary things of that mission, that there's a lot of adventures to be had there. And the cool thing, one zone, you can only get there by taking a boat along the Amazon. So that's pretty cool, and all the missionaries like to talk about how they actually went along the Amazon to get to one of their areas. In total, I served from June 2013 to May 2015, but in Brazil itself, I served January 2014 to May 2015. My areas within Brazil, my first area was called Canaã dos Carajás, na Zona Marabá. My second area was the area Cidade Nova in Ananindeua, in the Zona Cidade Nova. And then my third area was a city called Santana in the state of Amapá, na Zona Macapá. And then my last area was a borough called Tenone, which is a part of the city of Iquaraci within Belém, na Zona Iquaraci. Belém is a very interesting city. It's a very large city. There are some millions of people that live there. I'm not sure how many people live there, but it's a big city. And it's a very sprawled out city. It's a big urban sprawl. And I guess some of the interesting facts about it is there are lots of skyscrapers in this city. And so as you're coming in on the plane, you're probably going to go through Sao Paulo. And Sao Paulo is amazing to see. That is just skyscrapers as far as the eye can see, just a gigantic city. And then you think that the rest of Brazil is going to be kind of small because we always hear that Sao Paulo is the third biggest city in the world. You go up to Belém, it is big. It is a very big city. I remember thinking that coming in. The airport itself is not very big, but yeah, you come out, it's just this giant city, and it's pretty daunting at first. And then you see just how the city's divided up amongst the missionaries, that all of the different stakes are basically just the different boroughs of Belém. But yeah, you have your rich portion of the city, which that's where the mission president lives, where the mission office is. That part's called Nazaré, which is funny because that's Portuguese for Nazareth. And the city itself, Belém, that translates to Bethlehem. And then my first area was Canaã, which translates to Canaan. So there are lots of biblical names. And so I remember laughing about that with the missionaries. I'm like, yeah, I got called to the Bethlehem mission and reported to the office in Nazareth. And then I got called to Canaan as my first area. So you have to understand that there's this big culture, and Belém is a very interesting culture about it. That as far as culture goes, it really revolves around religion. Not just Catholicism. But interestingly enough, there's a church, I think it's the Assembly of God, is how it translates to in English. The Assembly of God is huge in Belém. Huge! That's basically where it started for Brazil. That it showed up in Belém and then fanned out across Brazil. You have that church, I think in Portuguese, the Quadrangular Church, is very prominent there. So you have the Assembly of God, them, Quadrangular, you have Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, they're very big. They're in Belém. You have the Catholics, of course. And you have the Adventists. You have really every church. And there's a very large biblical culture there. And it's interesting because in the United States, there are lots of churches, of course. We're very religious. But in the streets, you don't see it as much. People don't go around just talking about God and talking about the Bible in America. But in Brazil, they do. It's interesting. There are a bunch of different sayings down in Brazil. Like one of them is graças a Deus, thanks to God. And people say that at the end of everything. If you're just talking to people, you ask someone, how's your day? It's well, graças a Deus. People talk about that all the time. So there's this big culture around God. And so the people are very religious in Belém, which is something I admired. But yeah, another thing that's interesting is transportation in Brazil, in Belém, because it's a hot mess there in Belém. It's crazy. There are just a few big freeways, and these freeways are just kind of crazy. I don't know if you've ever seen Mad Max or anything like that, but it kind of reminds me of that sometimes. There's just this crazy road rage going on where people don't always obey the traffic laws. But strangely enough, accidents never happen. Like, I never saw very many accidents while I was down there, at least not very many serious ones, but yet people are reckless as they drive, but they just don't hit each other. So I'm like, that's impressive in my opinion. But the morning rush as you go into Belem, that's something to behold, seriously. Because a lot of people, work in the center of Belem, but they live on the outskirts of Belem, so everyone relies on buses and such. These buses get loaded with people. We don't know what it's like in America because we don't allow people to do the following. I remember one time when I was on a bus and I look at, and there are just people all around me and just like, right in my face. It's kind of like riding a train in Japan or something like that. There's just people don't understand personal space. But I remember looking out the window, I'm a tall guy, so I could at least see over everybody and look out the window. And I saw another bus where there was an older guy on the outside of the bus, but hanging on to the inside of the windows of the bus. And so as they're driving, I just saw this guy hanging on outside of the bus, riding alongside. And, every once in a while he'd kind of get a little bit tired and you'd see people stick their arms out and like hang on to him to make sure he doesn't fall into traffic and die. But there was a guy riding on the side of the bus as we were going to Belem in the morning. I was just like, this is ridiculous. But that's how loaded buses can get. And so transportation is crazy in Belem. Yeah, there are a few mistakes that were pretty funny. One of my best, though, was actually just in the MTC. So I wasn't in a serious lesson or anything. But I remember sitting there and mixing up the words for I can and I fart. And so when I said, like, I wanted to say, oh, I can read that scripture, but instead I said, oh, I fart read that scripture. And then the teacher that was there, he just started to laugh and just laughed for about a minute. And I didn't even know what was going on. I was like, I wasn't trying to be funny. And then he was like, do you understand what you said? And I was like, obviously not. And then he explained it to me and I just felt terrible. I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I did that. But as far as other language mistakes, yeah, there are lots of funny ones. Without telling the story, it involves some crude terms, but, there are lots of slangs that are formed out of when you use diminutives or when you make words larger in Portuguese. You can change up the words a lot, and sometimes there is slang behind those words. So you think you're saying something, but you're really not. You're inadvertently using a slang that means something totally different. So I'd say be careful about that, and make sure you ask the fellow Brazilians around you, about the slangs that are popular within your area. This definitely does not happen to every missionary, but my most dangerous experience was that with a disease. This is the Amazon. If you're not careful, there's some weird things that happen along the Amazon, but I got flesh-eating bacteria within my foot, and which was a very excruciatingly painful experience. And at one point I was almost going to have to lose my foot because of this flesh-eating bacteria, but I was able to get to a hospital and they had to perform a very painful surgery on my foot to get it all out. And so that was probably the most dangerous experience that I had, was that with flesh-eating bacteria. So as far as the causes go, the doctors couldn't quite identify exactly what caused me to catch this, but I don't know, I have a few of my own theories. I think part of it was that we were walking so much, and there are no cars, there are no bikes, because if we use bikes, they're just going to get stolen. And so we don't have cars or bikes on the mission, so wherever you go by foot, or if you've got cash on you, then you use the bus. But generally, you're walking. So at one point, we were walking so much that I got a bunch of blisters on my feet, and I think that had to do with it. I had these blisters, and I didn't properly care for them. There are very specific things you're supposed to do if you have blisters on your feet. Use certain ointments or medicines or put gauze tape on these blisters. There are things to do to avoid what happened to me. Just be honest and clear on that. But I didn't do these things, so I kind of asked for it. And I think part of it too is that you're sweating so much because you're walking around. This is one of the hottest areas within the mission that I was serving in. And I was sweating so much that I think that had to do with it. The combination of sweat and the blisters, just, you got infected, and then the bacteria was able to start to grow. That makes that happen. And some of the symptoms is a lot of blood. That your blisters open up and they keep opening. They get bigger, basically, and it hurts really bad, and you start to get a fever, a very serious fever. And the pain isn't just in your foot, the pain's all up in your leg. And so everything kind of hurts. And so when I know one day I was walking around and my feet were hurting, but then my whole leg started hurting, I was like, well, what's going on? Like, I just have some blisters, like that. Nothing new to a missionary. And then as I took my shoe off and pulled my sock off, I found out that I had bled a ton into my shoe and blood all over my sock, and realized, oh gosh, I need to get this checked out. And I had developed a really serious fever at that point, so I had to go back to the apartment and take it easy. And then the next day I went to the hospital, and they're like, yeah, you're pretty lucky. Like, if you had waited around a lot longer, we might have had to amputate. So it's disgusting. I'm not going to get into the details of what they did to me, but they gave me a shot in a certain region that hurt really bad. And then after that, they just got to work on my foot and basically just had to use metal tools, and they had to get all of the infected flesh out of my foot. And so they did do that any way possible, and it hurt how they did it. And then after that, they just have to put a lot of medicine in it and make sure everything's sterilized and such. And then, yeah, then I was good. They put a bunch of bandages and told me you can go home now. So the shot was supposed to make me feel numb, but I don't know what they did, but it didn't work very well. It was actually a really sketchy hospital that I went to because I was in the boonies. And so the hospital, I don't know if the staff really knew exactly what they were doing, but yeah, the idea was to numb up my legs so they could go in and get all the infected flesh out without me feeling anything. It didn't work very well because I sure felt a lot. And basically just use a metal pick to get out all of the infected flesh out of these blisters. And it was painful. It was excruciating. That it was funny at one point because there was a nurse that was helping me, and she was talking with the other elder that was with me, and she was asking about who we are, what we do. And the elder with me, being a good guy, starts talking about the Book of Mormon, what we do as missionaries, and she's like, oh, that's such a beautiful work that you guys do. Would you say it's worth it? Is it worth everything you go through? And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I'm asking myself that right now. Because it was that bad. And the nurse laughed and the elder laughed. But yeah, so after I got all of the infected flesh taken out, they gave me a bunch of medicine and stuff that I had to keep putting on it. And they told me to stay off my foot for a week. So that was torture. I had to stay in the apartment for a week, not able to go out and do work and teach the people we were teaching. So it was a hard week. It was a long week, but I sure did sleep a lot. I was about 18 months out by that point, so it was some needed sleep. I served there in 2014, and I was there during the summer. And so for those of you who know, that was the same time as the World Cup. That was taking place in Brazil. This is a very difficult time to be serving a mission in Brazil, no question about it, because everybody is a lot more interested in watching soccer than in hearing the gospel. But I remember there was a day where, during the actual games, the games between Brazil and any country, all of us missionaries were told to go home and just stay in the apartment during the game because nobody's going to want us to come in, right? Anyway, so we go in during the games, and I remember there was one game in particular that it started to pour in our mission during this game. You have to understand, in Belem, it rains almost every afternoon, like torrential rainstorms during the rainy season. So there was this day where it just started to rain and rain and rain to the point where the streets were getting flooded. And the streets were flooded by the end of the game. Like, all of the houses, like, as you enter them, a lot of them are elevated. So you always have to take kind of a large step to get up into the house. And that is not an accident. That's because the rain can make the water rise, really quickly. So there's a lot of flash flooding that goes on in Belem. So I remember we were in our apartment and it was flash flooding, and it was really high up. And so normally missionaries, you're not really expected to go out when it's like that because it's dangerous, for one. And that's also how you catch diseases. If you walk in the rainwater too much and you have open wounds and such, it's a great way to catch a disease. Anyway, I remember as we were sitting there with my companion that I started to get this prompting that we needed to go to someone's apartment, someone that we were teaching. And but then I looked out the window and I just see it's raining and you can see lightning bolts streaking across the sky and this flash flooding taking place down the streets. And I was like, no way, Lord, this is ridiculous. And then it hit me again. We have to go. We have to go. The game had already finished, and so we were expected to work. And I remember turning to my companion. I'm like, Elder, I'm sorry, but we got to get out of here. We got to go out and teach. We got to go talk to this person. I'm really feeling it. And my companion's like, okay. So we got our umbrellas together, and my umbrella was broken by this point. Like, Belem will do that to your umbrellas. So I had this busted up umbrella, and I'm just like, well, it's going to have to do. And we put on our shoes, and then we start traversing in this water. And it was a struggle to get out in this water. We were trying to stay on the rim of these apartments, that if you can kind of keep going from window to window and like kind of stay on this rim along the houses, you don't have to step in this rainwater, but it didn't always work out that way. But I remember regardless, it's kind of like playing a Mario game or something where you're trying to not fall down, right? Fall into a pit. But that's what we were kind of doing, is going around and we'd be stepping on stumps. If we see a box, we'll step on that. If we see cinder blocks, we try and step on that. And it was a lot of pain and a lot of work. And I remember halfway through going there, my umbrella just ripped and I was getting soaked like no other. But I still had this feeling, keep going, got to get to this person's apartment. And I was like, okay, Lord, we will get there, we'll go. You're telling me to go, so we'll go. And we were across the street from this person's apartment, and the water was probably up to about my shins. It was that high up. And I remember we were looking all up and down the road. We were trying to find, is there some elevated portion of the street that we can step on to be able to get to the other side and get to this person's apartment? There was nothing. And I remember just standing there, and my companion was kind of like, well, I guess we could just, walk all the way down, walk a few blocks to try to find something. And then I was just like, Elder, we need to get there now. And I was like, we've come this far, I'm not turning around now. And stepped out into this filthy water that came up to my shin. And I remember just wading across this water in the middle of a thunderstorm, soaked through and through, and I'm doing all of this on a feeling, a good feeling. I'm going through all of this. And then my companion shortly thereafter follows suit and starts wading through the water as well. Soaked through and through, and pretty sure there must be so many diseases attached to my clothing at that point, and getting inside my socks and stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to pay for this. Probably more flesh-eating bacteria. But anyway, I step up finally onto the other side of the sidewalk and come out of the water just filthy and gross, basically. And I don't recommend doing this for anybody. But regardless, we knocked on the door, and this lady that we were teaching opened the door, and she just looked at us and she was amazed. And we were like, what? And she was like, I was just praying to God. I was just praying, to really, get some help and understand if this was all true or not. And here you guys, in the middle of this thunderstorm, in the middle of this flash flood, you guys came to me. I remember that was very powerful, and that definitely boosted my testimony, that even if you have to go to hell and back, if you're doing it on a feeling sent to you from the Lord, it's going to work out. And you are serving a very specific purpose. And so, we dried off a bit, and we got in there, and we were able to talk to her and find out that, she was really feeling these things are true, but she still wanted more help. And she had been praying. And she specifically was wanting to see us and was hoping that we would come to see her. And the Lord let us know that she was hoping for it, and we acted on it. The most extreme weather I experienced was very heavy rainfall and crazy big thunderstorms. Quickly on that point, there was one area that I was serving in where there was a giant mine and there's a lot of metal on the ground, and so it was actually heard that people were killed by lightning strikes within that area. I myself never had any problems with that. I never heard of anybody getting killed, but apparently in the past that had happened. But some areas experience very intense thunderstorms, but in general, you just get rain. I served along the Amazon, and there's a lot of myths and theories about crazy wild animals and stuff along the Amazon. I didn't have any problems with them. I mean, if you're swimming in the Amazon, yeah, you might encounter some crazy stuff, piranhas, and then actually much scarier things in the Amazon than piranhas, but missionaries aren't allowed to swim, so we don't need to worry about crazy fishes and stuff. But other than that, wildlife, I don't know, some dogs, I guess, in the streets, but again, I never had problems with dogs or anything like that. It's interesting, a lot of people eat at Rodizio Grill or at Tucanos here in America and think that's what Brazil's like. Not really. Brazilian food is actually really simple, at least where I was at. It was just rice and beans almost all the time. And it grows on you. First few times you might not like it, but it grows on you. And then another thing is that they eat fish a lot down there, but sometimes they don't debone the fish, so be careful. Because there are lots of little, I don't know what they call it in English, but little tiny bones that if you don't get it out of your fish, then it's going to stab your mouth when you eat it, so be careful about that. But crazier food than that, there's really nothing. You just eat chicken and beef mostly. I knew lots of funny little tricks with laundry and how to keep my shirt white. That's a big struggle within the Brazil missions, within any mission where you sweat a lot, is how do I get my yellow shirt to be white and how do I keep my garments white? And so I actually learned lots of weird little solutions with just household products to create whitening product basically, and figured out funny little things about how to do my laundry. Like at one point you learn how to do laundry with your feet. Like you stomp on your clothes and stuff and you can wash your clothes that way. So I learned lots of funny little laundry tricks and stuff like that. I also learned cooking tricks. You learn lots of little funny things, mostly to save time and to save the meager amount of money that you get. I would like to bear my testimony, about how special the mission is and how important the mission has been for me in my life. I testify that this is the Church of Jesus Christ here upon the earth. This is the one and only Church of Jesus Christ. There can't be multiple churches of Him. There is only one. And I testify that God lives. He really is there. He listens to us. He knows us. He knows what we need to experience and how we need to grow. The mission was very hard. And there were lots of experiences that were difficult, not just physically, but emotionally as well and spiritually. And when times are hard on the mission, it's not because God has abandoned you, doesn't love you, because He needs you to become something more. And through the mission, I know I became something a little bit more than what I was before the mission. Still plenty of growth to be made on my part, but the mission was a very important part of that growth. And I know that these things happen because what we teach is true. And I bear my testimony that I know that this church is true. And I know that Jesus Christ lives, and that He did suffer and die for our sins. And it was that special and important message that I had the opportunity to share for 2 years, and I am very grateful for. And I bear this testimony in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.